Top 10 Best and Worst Stephen Moffat Who Stories. Stephen Moffat is one of Doctor Who's most prolific, controversial and divisive writers. To some he's one of the best writers ever, to others he's one of the worst. To me, he's kind of both at the same time. I was a big fan of Moffat pre-New Who, and delighted when he began writing for the show, and I sure wasn't disappointed by most of his stuff, up to and including his first season as showrunner, Series 5, which is my favorite of New Who. However, things went starkly downhill after that, and stayed that way for a long, long time. Since my view on him is so split, I thought a video highlighting his top 10 best stories and his top 10 worst stories might be good for a laugh. And to make this video as schizophrenic as his writing, I'm going to do it in a deliberately confusing manner to boot. Top 10 Best Moffat Stories. 10. World Enough and Time. The two-part Series 10 finale that really should have been Peter Capaldi's final story is a sterling example of the way that Moffat seemed to, in Series 10, rediscover the mojo that he clearly lost behind the fridge back in 2011. This story has its irritants, such as Missy and the gender-bending bollocks, not to mention the fan-trolling Doctor Who bit at the start, and Part 2 is nowhere near as good as Part 1, but on the whole this story is pretty solid. And Part 1 is generally superb. The reintroduction of the original Cyberman, who frankly I never even liked in the first place, is gobsmackingly well done, as is the fantastically dark tone and the return of John Sim as the Master, complete with old-school Anthony Ainley rip-off your mask cliffhanger. I love that shit. Top 10 Worst Moffat Stories. 10. Listen. This massively overrated tale from Peter Capaldi's first season really pisses me off, mainly because, unlike most of the rest on my worst list, it starts off pretty good. I watched this again recently and, just like the first time, I'm thoroughly engaged with the episode and interested in what's going on, liking the creepy atmosphere etc., and then it all just falls to absolute bits in the last 10 minutes. Resorting to tedious fan wank and more Clara Mary suing in what may be the worst example of the writer just giving up and going fuck it, that'll do. Top 10 Best Moffat Stories. 9. Deep Breath. I say that Moffat went wildly off the rails mid-Series 6, but this feature-length Series 8 opener actually briefly suggested that things were going to get better sooner. They didn't, obviously. But while it takes a bit of time to get going, Deep Breath is a pretty solid new Doctor story, as well as being a much better slice of Gothic Victoriana than his previous Snowman effort. I don't mind the Paternoster gang, and they're still entertaining here. I always lol at Strax hitting Clara in the face with the newspaper, but that's just me I guess. Top 10 Worst Moffat Stories. 9. A Christmas Carol. The first warning sign that the Moffat era might not end up as the glorious golden age I'd been hoping for. His first Christmas special is a moribund slice of tediousness mixed with mawkishness. Amy and Rory are hardly in it, which is never a good sign, and the 11th Doctor is suddenly and alarmingly recharacterized as a babbling tit. I tried to watch this again recently during a bit of a rewatch of the era that actually made me reassess a few episodes like The Bells of St. John, but nope, this one is still unwatchable shite. Top 10 Best Moffat Stories. 8. The Pilot. It is fair to say that my interest in New Who was nearly as dead as Kevin Spacey's career in early 2017, following 2 dreadful seasons. I wasn't expecting much of an improvement, but shockingly, Series 10 did seem to see Moffat regain some spark again, and this season premiere is a good indication of that. Story-wise it's nothing overtly special, but as a companion introduction story it does its job and then some, and Capaldi is also given a bit of a makeover that makes him seem more doctorish in 45 minutes than he had for most of his previous 2 seasons. Top 10 Worst Moffat Stories. 8. The Doctor, the Widow and the Wardrobe. What the fuck is this shit? If I thought the previous year's Christmas special was mawkish drivel, I hadn't seen anything yet. Bloodless, saccharine and nightmarishly dull. This again also does that weird Christmas special thing of all but writing out two of the era's best assets, Amy and Rory, for no apparent reason. Top 10 Best Moffat Stories. 7. Silence in the Library. The best story of Series 4 and the first in the list written outside of his own era, this two-part Tennant yarn has its flaws, like a somewhat uneven second part. A Moffat trademark, it has to be said, but it remains a very watchable and fun adventure story, if never quite as scary as it seems to think it is. Top 10 Worst Moffat Stories. 7. Asylum of the Daleks. Continuing the grand New Who tradition of not being able to produce a single good Dalek story since 2007, this Series 7 opener is an absolute mess in every capacity. Amy and Rory are suddenly on the verge of divorce, completely out of nowhere. Why? Fuck knows. But they make it all up within 45 minutes, so it doesn't fucking matter anyway. What the fuck? Where the fuck did that come from? And then there's the rest of it, including the basic concept. Since when would Daleks have an asylum? They have no compunction whatsoever about killing their own, never have, so the whole concept is complete bollocks. The Oswin stuff isn't bad on its own, but it appears to be the only part of the entire story that Moffat actually gave any thought to. The rest of it is lazy speed-written shit of the worst kind. Top 10 Best Moffat Stories. 6. The 11th Hour. We all know why this is good. A near-complete reboot of the show, and a far more successful one than Christian Ball's recent kamikaze effort. Matt Smith is effortlessly the Doctor. Karen Gillan is effortlessly the best companion of the whole of New Who bar none, and Moffat effortlessly establishes a new tone, feel and direction for the show, and one that was pretty damn appealing to me personally. Great stuff. Top 10 Worst Moffat Stories. 6. The Time of the Doctor. Matt Smith was a pretty great Doctor, and while his era did go rather downhill in the second half, Moffat would still give him the send-off he deserved and let him go out in a blaze of glory, right? Nope, afraid not. The Time of the Doctor is seriously awful crap, starting off with some painfully cringy and unfunny comedy where the Doctor is running around naked, or something, then becomes painfully boring for 40-odd minutes while he sits in an alien village and does fuck all for a couple of thousand years, which is basically how the viewer feels watching this. Oh, and the many mysteries built up over the era are either left unexplained or thrown away in some painfully lame throwaway exposition that make it painfully clear Moffat had no idea what the fuck he was doing the whole time. The regeneration scene is, mercifully, actually pretty spot on, and let's face it, it's got Amy in it, so I'm going to like it anyway, but aside from that this is bloody awful. The best New Who Doctor deserved better. Top 10 Best Moffat Stories. 5. Blink. Some people think Blink is the best story ever. It isn't. Some people think Blink is overrated. It is. Some people think they're cool and iconoclastic for saying it's actually crap. They're not. Blink is awesome, there ain't no doubt about it, though there is something telling and comical that possibly the best story of the Tennant era hardly has him in it. He chuckle guffaw titter. Calling it the best story ever is just going a bit OTT, let's face it. But yeah, it's great, scary and clever in equal measure, and we got to stare at a truly mouth-watering Carey Mulligan for 45 minutes. Hell yeah. Top 10 Worst Moffat Stories. 5. Heaven Sent, Hellbent. I'm putting these together because, reasons. In the former, Peter Capaldi wanders around a castle for 50 minutes doing fuck all, and not talking to anyone because no one else is in it. This is a staggering classic and amazing work of televisual art, apparently. Nah, it's just another piece of self-indulgent and boring shite, that's what it is. While in the latter, Nearly a decade of building up Gallifrey as a mythical icon is shut on in 2 minutes flat, so Moffat can bumfuck Clara some more. Kill me now. Top 10 Best Moffat Stories. 4. The Big Bang. The series' 5 two-part finale is unpopular with some fans, especially part 2, but tough shit I say. I really enjoy this one and, controversially, I like part 2 even more than part 1. It's got that classic Who thing going of being set on an epic scale despite being set in a small environment with a limited number of characters, and it does it very well. I'm just a Series 5 fanboy, let's face it. Top 10 Worst Moffat Stories. 4. Let's Kill Hitler. The heart of Series 6 and the Matt Smith era, an unbelievably pivotal story. So Moffat, clearly in the midst of a nervous breakdown, decides to cram a whole load of exposition into a wacky comedy that's not remotely funny while also running about as far away from realistic emotional responses and consequences as he can possibly manage. A gigantic turd and no mistake. This is the one where River Song, completely and irrevocably, finally becomes a complete joke. Top 10 Best Moffat Stories. 3. The Impossible Astronaut. The Series 6 arc is not popular with fans, and I don't disagree, but the Series 6 opening two-parter is still a huge favorite of mine. The central plot is excellent and has a terrific resolution despite it annoying some fans who seem to think the Doctor should be some total tenant-like pacifist pansy instead of the complete fucking badass he actually is. The regulars are on top form. The US 60s setting is great, Canton is one of the best guest characters of all of New Who, and for sheer atmosphere there are very few modern Who stories that can beat it. Top 10 Worst Moffat Stories. 3. Death in Heaven. If Let's Kill Hitler is something of a jump the shark moment for the Smith era, the Series 8 closing two-parter is that moment for the Capaldi era, and then some. The gender-bending retcon bullshit that had led the show to its current status as an international laughingstock begins here, with the dreadful Missy revelation that had me reaching for the off switch the first time. I tried to watch this again recently, given I have grown to at least tolerate Missy sometimes if the story is good enough, for instance Extremis, which only just missed out on being on the top 10 list, Fact Fans, or World Enough and Time, but that is not the case here. The first part of this toxic two-parter is a tedious, stupid and irritating mess, but yet again I could not manage part 2. Though I know about a lot of it. Absolutely fucking dreadful on every level. Moffat must have been on fucking crack when he wrote this. Top 10 Best Moffat Stories. 2. The Time of Angels. This early Series 5 two-parter sees the Angels back for their encore appearance, back when they were still awesome and scary instead of overused, cliched and tedious, and they are, if anything, even scarier and more badass here than they were in Blink. Add to this Matt Smith and Karen Gillan absolutely and totally nailing the Doctor and Amy in what was their very first time in front of the cameras and a return to the good old second Doctor favorite base under siege plot, and you have a kick-ass action horror that never gets old. Still fucking love this. Top 10 Worst Moffat Stories. 2. The Magicians Apprentice. Oh fuck. All I can say is that Moffat's crack addiction must have been even more pronounced when he spewed the Series 9 opening two-parter out from his backside, because holy shit this is bad. Beautifully produced and shot, but here that is the definition of polishing an absolute turd. I turned this off about 10 minutes in on first viewing, but I did manage to watch part 1 in full in a recent rewatch, with the occasional slap across the face to try and keep paying attention. But as with the Series 8 finale, more than 10 minutes of the, unbelievably, even worse part 2, I could not take. Rambling, incoherent, painfully self-indulgent and with a hideously newly mischaracterized 12th Doctor who's unrecognizable from his Series 8 persona, this might even top Journey's End as the worst Dalek story ever made. Top 10 Best Moffat Stories. 1. The Empty Child. I'm afraid so. Moffat's debut story remains his best story, and to my mind the best Doctor Who story of the 21st century. A near-perfect example of how to do a classic-style Doctor Who story in modern times, The Empty Child remains as funny, atmospheric and flat-out scary as it was in 2005, and it remains a crying shame that New Who as a whole did not immediately set out to make this the new format instead of, well, a lot of what we did end up with. Top 10 Worst Moffat Stories. 1. Twice Upon a Turd. No, sorry, that's Twice Upon a Time. No, sorry, I got it right the first time. Let's face it, unless you've been living under a rock for the last 2 years, you lucky bastard, you know exactly why this is here. Doctor Who falls victim to the virtue signaling, PC identity politics SJW wanker brigade in the worst possible way, and I'm not talking about the castration of an iconic male hero and role model in the last minute either. I'm talking about the utterly disgusting revisionist strawman caricature of the First Doctor, played spectacularly badly by David Bradley, presented here. It's not enough to destroy a male icon and replace it with a female. We have to be a full-on communist piece of shit and rewrite history in a paper-thin, piss-poor, shockingly offensive attempt to justify it. This is an utter travesty, and the fact that Moffat wrote it, Bradley performed it, and Peter Capaldi didn't just pick up the phone when he read the script and tell Moffat to change it or he was out the fucking door is a permanent stain on the fucking lot of them. The worst Moffat story, and quite probably the worst and most utterly repulsive Doctor Who story of all time,